Arrest every one of them!
You should have asked who they were first.
Power in its most pathetic and fragile form always seeks to sanitize the world around it. It demands flat chemically treated lawns of uniform height, sterile glass walls that reflect a manufactured security, and a quiet, compliant silence that mimics the peace of a graveyard. To the board of the neighboring Whispering Cove Homeowners Association, the entire universe was a canvas of architectural regulations, paint swatches, and grass blade measurements. They lived in an artificial paradise, a highly manicured world where nature was not a living, breathing force, but merely a decorative element to be sanitized, gated, and controlled. But to the men who actually stood between that fragile, beautiful illusion and the raw, violent realities of the dark power was something else entirely. It was not a gold-plated clipboard, a threat of administrative fines, or a corporate title. It was the quiet, absolute confidence of a wolf sitting in the shadows of the forest, watching a sheep try to roar. My name is Logan Vance. At 26, I am a lieutenant in the United States Navy, specifically attached to the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, what the civilian world, the media, and the Hollywood movies call SEAL Team 6. I am not retired, nor am I wounded. My body is in the absolute peak of physical conditioning, a weapon forged by years of brutal selection, specialized training, combat operations, and a relentless dedication to the art of special warfare. I have spent the last 6 months in the dust gravel and high-altitude cold of the Hindu Kush, executing operations that will never appear in any news report, under a sky that didn't care about my name. My right shoulder, though scarred, is whole and powerful, capable of carrying 100 pounds of gear over a mountain ridge or throwing a heavy-duty line in a gale. I didn't need a medical excuse to be here. I was home because I had earned my 3 days of annual leave, 36 precious hours of operational decompression, after a deployment that would have broken a lesser man. Today I was celebrating my 26th birthday at my family's ancestral waterfront estate on the rugged pine-fringed shoreline of Puget Sound, Washington. The Vance estate was not a modern architectural marvel of steel, glass, and concrete. It was a sprawling 10-acre sanctuary of ancient, towering Douglas firs, weathered cedar cabins, and a deep-water stone dock that had belonged to my family since 1867. The land was deeded under a historic federal land patent signed by President Andrew Johnson himself, a rare and highly valuable legal anomaly that extended my private property line all the way to the extreme low water mark of the bay. Most modern waterfront properties stopped at the high tide line, leaving the beach as public or shared space. Not mine. My family owned the sand, the gravel, the mud, and the water column itself during low tide. We were a family of sailors, soldiers, and builders. We had been here before the state of Washington was even a territory, and we would be here long after the concrete foundations of the neighboring developments crumbled into the salt water. Our cabin was built of rough-sawn local timber and river stone, heated by a massive stone fireplace that my great-grandfather had built with his own hands. It was a place of quiet memories where the walls smelled of cedar wood smoke and old gun oil. Directly adjacent to my quiet sanctuary lay Whispering Cove Estates, a newly constructed ultra-luxury gated community where the houses looked like sterile Apple stores and the residents lived in a constant, anxious state of keeping up appearances. The president of their HOA was Brenda Sterling. Brenda was a retired corporate auditor who wore her self-importance like a suit of armor. She was obsessed with the collective property values of her development, and she viewed my rustic timber-fringed estate as a direct personal insult to her highly curated aesthetic standards. She had tried to buy my land 3 times, offering insulting sums of money, and each time I had ignored her letters with the quiet indifference she deserved. To Brenda, a pristine waterfront meant synthetic Kentucky bluegrass rolling all the way to a concrete retaining wall. To me, it meant drift logs, barnacles, the heavy scent of low-tide kelp, and the absolute freedom to let nature exist without an architectural permit. She hated my cabin because she couldn't control it. She hated me because I didn't care about her rules. As the sun began to dip below the Olympic Mountains, painting the sky in deep bruised shades of violet, orange, and crimson, the air over my property filled with the rich, savory smell of slow-roasting beef ribs, hickory smoke, and the crisp, clean scent of the saltwater tide. It was my birthday, and my team had arrived. About 30 men were scattered across my backyard. They were not dressed in uniform. They wore faded flannel shirts, worn jeans, muddy boots, and baseball caps. They had thick beard growth, calloused hands, and the unmistakable quiet physical presence of apex predators. To a casual observer, we looked like a rugged, brawny group of blue-collar workers, or perhaps an off-duty motorcycle club. We had parked our muddy, heavy-duty Ford F-250 and Ram 3500 diesel trucks along the winding gravel driveway of my property. Some of the trucks carried welding rigs, others had dirt bikes secured in the beds. It was a practical, unpretentious gathering of brothers. These were men who had cleared container ships in the North Atlantic, hunted warlords in the Kunar province, and operated in the most hostile, unforgiving environments on Earth. But tonight they were just 30 guys having a beer and celebrating a birthday. We were laughing, drinking local craft beer, and listening to the low, steady hum of a classic rock playlist playing from a weathered field radio. Then the gate clicked. Brenda Sterling marched onto my property like a colonial governor entering a hostile village. She was accompanied by her executive vice president, a nervous-looking man named Harold, and two of the HOA's private security guards. The guards were off-duty county deputies wearing black security polo shirts and heavy, unnecessary tactical belts. They looked like they wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Brenda's posture was rigid, her face set in a mask of absolute icy disapproval. She clutched a gold-plated clipboard against her chest, her designer sunglasses pushed up onto her perfectly sprayed blonde hair. She walked past my friends, her eyes scanning their rugged clothing, their tattoos, and their muddy trucks with a look of profound disgust. "Lieutenant Vance!" Her voice rang out sharp, high-pitched, and dripping with condescension. She stopped 10 feet from the heavy stone fire pit where the ribs were smoking. "I knew you lacked a basic understanding of community standards, but this is an absolute abomination." I didn't stand up immediately. I was sitting on a hand-carved cedar bench holding a bottle of cold IPA. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the silence stretch until it became visibly uncomfortable for her. The 30 men around the yard went completely silent, their laughter cutting off instantly. The sudden absolute quiet that fell over the property was heavy, pregnant with the quiet, focused energy of a combat unit transitioning into a tactical mindset. "Good evening, Mrs. Sterling," I said, my voice calm, level, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Can I offer you a rib? We have plenty." "Don't play games with me, Logan," she snapped, tapping her red-painted fingernail against the gold clipboard. "This is not a campground, and it is certainly not a low-class biker hangout. You have violated no fewer than 7 municipal and community regulations tonight. We have a strict ban on commercial-scale open-flame cooking, unauthorized gatherings of more than 10 non-residents, and the parking of commercial and high-emission diesel vehicles along the shared access corridor. This entire circus is dragging down the tone of our neighborhood. Our Phase 2 buyers are arriving tomorrow morning, and I will not have them looking at a bunch of dirty, unemployed ruffians drinking beer on a ruined lawn." She gestured toward my team men who had survived multiple combat tours, men who held Navy crosses, silver stars, and Purple Hearts, men who represented the absolute pinnacle of American military capability. To Brenda, they were merely unemployed ruffians who didn't fit her color-coordinated aesthetic. "The trucks are parked entirely on my private gravel driveway, Mrs. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And this is a private birthday gathering. These men are my friends, and they are guests on my property. Your property is subject to the shared environmental and aesthetic impact covenants of Whispering Cove." She hissed, stepping closer, her expensive perfume battling the rich scent of hickory smoke. "Under Article 8 of our bylaws, any adjacent property that creates an active visual or environmental nuisance can be subject to immediate administrative enforcement. I have already drafted the citation. Because of the scale of this violation, the environmental impact of your smoke, and the parking blight, the HOA board has assessed a special administrative fine of $10,000 against this parcel. Furthermore, you have 15 minutes to disperse this crowd and remove those hideous trucks, or I will have my security team coordinate with the county sheriff to have every single one of your guests arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace." She looked at the 2 off-duty deputies behind her, expecting them to nod in agreement. Instead, both men were staring intently at the ground, their faces pale, refusing to make eye contact with anyone in our yard. One of them, a seasoned deputy named Miller, had just spotted the unmistakable black and gold trident insignia tattooed on the inner forearm of one of my teammates who was standing near the beer cooler. Miller's hand was twitching nervously near his utility belt. He knew exactly what kind of men were sitting in this yard. But Brenda was completely blind. She was a petty queen ruling over a kingdom of grass blades, and she believed her crown was made of solid gold. In the military, we are taught that when an adversary is determined to execute a foolish maneuver, you do not interrupt them. You do not shout, you do not threaten, and you do not reveal your strength. You simply guide their momentum, allowing their own weight, arrogance, and speed to carry them directly into the abyss. It is a fundamental principle of combat: never stand in the way of a self-destructive impulse. When a target is determined to walk into a fatal funnel of their own, making you simply step aside and watch the physics of their own momentum do the work. I looked at Brenda. I looked at the gold-plated clipboard. I saw the pure, unadulterated pleasure she derived from this small, pathetic exercise of authority. She truly believed she had won. She believed that a 26-year-old kid in a t-shirt would be intimidated by her $10,000 fine and her threats of foreclosure. She thought that because she lived in a house with a heated driveway, she owned the tide in the forest. She had spent her entire career in corporate auditing, where paperwork was a weapon and compliance was absolute. She assumed that the military was just another corporate hierarchy where junior officers quaked in their boots at the mention of a fine. $10,000 is a very specific number, Mrs. Sterling. I said, my voice soft, almost contemplative. It is a fully authorized penalty under our special enforcement guidelines for severe aesthetic and environmental noncompliance. She said, a triumphant, cold smile spreading across her face. And it will double every 24 hours that the violation persists. We will file the lien by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, Logan. We will tie up your title block, your bank accounts, and force you to sell this eyesore of a cabin to someone who actually understands how to live in a civilized society. I see, I replied. I stood up slowly. I am 6'2", with broad shoulders and a physical presence that has been described by instructors as highly imposing. But I kept my posture relaxed, my hands open, projecting an image of quiet, submissive cooperation. I don't want any trouble, Brenda. This is my family's land, and I want to enjoy my birthday in peace. If I agree to move the trucks and ensure that my guests maintain absolute order, will you waive the fine? Brenda's eyes gleamed with a predatory satisfaction. This was her victory. She had forced the stubborn, rugged young man to bend the knee. She had proven that the HOA's bylaws were more powerful than a military commission or a century of family history. She could already picture her report to the board. Through decisive and firm administrative enforcement, I have successfully curbed the non-compliant activities at the Vance parcel and restored the visual harmony of our eastern border. The board will only consider waiving the penalty if we have a formal, legally binding compliance agreement, she said, her voice dripping with smug superiority. I don't trust your verbal promises, Logan. You military types think you are above the law. We need it in writing. I agree, I said, nodding meekly. Let's put it in writing, right now. I walked over to the wooden table near the cabin door where my laptop was open. My cousin Marcus, a brilliant Navy JAG captain who specialized in federal property and military jurisdiction, had spent the previous evening setting up a secure shared document on our local server. We had anticipated that Brenda would try to use her HOA software Community Connect to slap me with an administrative fine during my leave. Marcus had drafted a counter-agreement that was designed to look like a standard, boring municipal compliance waiver, but it contained a series of highly specific federal legal landmines. Marcus was a master of the fine print, the kind of military lawyer who could turn a standard environmental impact waiver into a weapon of absolute destruction. We had spent 4 hours the previous night refining the wording, ensuring that it looked completely compliant while remaining legally lethal. I logged into the HOA's digital portal, which Brenda had so proudly bragged about as a state-of-the-art administrative tool. I uploaded our document titled Aesthetic Compliance and Shared Shoreline Operational Agreement. I've uploaded the compliance waiver to your portal, Mrs. Sterling, I said, turning the laptop screen toward her. It states that I will immediately move the primary vehicles from the public access driveway and ensure that my guests do not violate the noise ordinances. In exchange, the HOA agrees to immediately and permanently rescind the $10,000 citation. Brenda stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden deck. She grabbed her reading glasses from her pocket, scanning the document quickly on the screen. She saw the words immediate compliance, removal of vehicles, maintenance of order, and rescission of the $10,000 fine. She did not bother to read the boilerplate paragraphs at the bottom of the second page. She was too eager, too blinded by the prospect of a swift total surrender. If she had read those paragraphs, she would have seen 3 highly specific, legally binding clauses that Marcus had woven into the dense corporate language. Clause 14b. The association explicitly acknowledges and agrees that the residence guests include active duty Department of Defense personnel. The association warrants that any administrative, civil, or law enforcement actions initiated by the association or its agents that directly or indirectly disrupt, harass, or interfere with active duty military personnel during their authorized leave shall constitute a material breach of federal military readiness standards. Clause 14C. In the event of such a breach, the association, its board members, and its officers in their personal capacities agree to accept 100% of all civil, federal, and punitive damages and explicitly waive all corporate immunity under state and municipal liability shields. Clause 14 to the association agrees that the Vance property sits under a historic federal land patent doc number 1867A and explicitly waives any municipal, county, or private administrative jurisdiction over the tidal zone's waterways and federal personnel operating within said boundaries. To Brenda, this was just standard boring legal jargon, boilerplate noise, designed to satisfy a young man's ego. She smiled, her fingers tapping the keyboard of my laptop as she entered her digital signature and the official presidential credentials of the Whispering Cove HOA. "Sign it and let's get those trucks moved, Logan," she said, her tone smugly victorious. "I want this circus cleaned up before the sun goes down." "Thank you, Mrs. Sterling," I said, my voice incredibly polite as the system generated the final locked PDF with her digital signature and IP address locked into the metadata of the document forever. "The trucks are being moved as we speak." I nodded to three of my teammates. Without a word, they walked toward the driveway. They didn't complain. They didn't argue. They simply got into three of the massive diesel trucks and moved them further down onto the sandy, unpaved portion of my private beach, well within my historic property line, completely hidden from the HOA's shared access road, but still perfectly positioned for what was to come. Brenda watched them move, her face displaying a look of smug maternal satisfaction. She had tamed the wild beast. She had brought order to her neighborhood. "Enjoy your little dinner, Logan," she said, turning her back on us. "But remember, we are watching you. One more slip up, and we will take this land." She marched back up the gravel path, her Vice President Harold scurrying behind her and her two guards following in silence. As they reached the gate, Deputy Miller looked back at our yard one last time. He caught my eye and he gave me a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent plea of, "I tried to warn her, Lieutenant." I simply nodded back. The trap was sprung. With Brenda's departure, the quiet tension in the yard evaporated, replaced by a low collective chuckle that rippled through the 30 men. These were men who had faced down warlords in the mountains of Kunar, cleared container ships in the middle of raging winter storms in the North Atlantic, and operated in the most hostile environments on Earth. The idea of a middle-aged woman with a gold clipboard threatening them with a $10,000 fine was the funniest thing they had heard all year. "Hey, Logan," called out a voice from the smoke-filled grill area. "Do you think Brenda wants me to cut the fat off these ribs? I wouldn't want to violate the aesthetic standards of her golf course." The speaker was a man in his mid-50s wearing a faded olive drab t-shirt, worn cargo shorts, and a stained apron that read, "The Grillmaster." He had a thick crop of silver gray hair, a deeply tanned face lined with decades of exposure to wind and salt water, and eyes that possessed a calm, terrifyingly deep focus. His name was Richard Vance. To the civilian world, he was my uncle, the man who had bought me my first fishing rod on this very dock. But to the military, he was Admiral Richard Vance, commander of the Naval Special Warfare Command, the three-star admiral who had supreme authority over every SEAL team, every special boat team, and every tactical unit on the West Coast. He was the man who reported directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And tonight he was in charge of the BBQ ribs. He had spent 30 years commanding thousands of men and managing billion-dollar defense budgets. But on my birthday, he took his role as the master of the grill with absolute meticulous seriousness. I had prepared a custom hickory dry rub, and he was monitoring the internal temperature of the beef ribs with the same precise focus he used during tactical briefings in the Pentagon. "Keep the fat on, Admiral," I laughed, walking back to the stone fire pit. "I think Brenda likes things clean, dry, and completely devoid of flavor." "The woman is an interesting specimen," Admiral Vance said, turning a massive rack of ribs with a pair of stainless steel tongs. "She reminds me of a mid-level bureaucrat I once met in the Ministry of Defense in Kabul. Absolute certainty in her own paperwork, and absolutely no idea that she is sitting on a powder keg. She thinks that because she has a title on a piece of paper, the physical laws of nature and the federal government must yield to her will. She has no concept of what true authority is, Logan. True authority doesn't need to bark through a gold clipboard. True authority is silent." "Did you sign the portal, Logan?" asked Marcus, my cousin, who was sitting near the woodpile with a tablet in his lap. He was a Navy JAG captain dressed in a casual blue linen shirt and shorts, looking like a relaxed vacationer. But his eyes were sharp, scanning the digital metadata of the signed agreement. "She signed it, Marcus," I said. "IP address, timestamp, and official HOA credentials are locked in." "Perfect." Marcus smiled, a slow, predatory expression that only a military lawyer could produce. "She just signed away her corporate shield. If she calls the local authorities or tries to disrupt this gathering, now she is personally liable for interfering with active duty federal personnel during a security-cleared operational stand-down. Under the Service Members Civil Relief Act and the federal military readiness statutes we cited, she's essentially placed her own neck in a legal guillotine. All we have to do is wait for her to pull the cord. And knowing Brenda, her ego won't allow her to let this rest. She wants to show her board that she can dominate this waterfront. And we didn't have to wait long. Up on the high bluff, inside her multi-million-dollar glass mansion, Brenda Sterling was not celebrating her victory. She was seething. She had stood on her balcony looking down through her binoculars, and she had seen that my guests were not packing up and leaving. They were still there, drinking beer, eating ribs, and laughing. To her, their laughter was a direct challenge to her authority. They weren't afraid of her. They weren't intimidated by her. They were acting as if her HOA didn't exist, as if their little gated community was just an annoying mosquito buzzing in the background. She decided that she had been too soft. She decided that the military kid needed to be taught a lesson he would never forget. Brenda picked up her phone and dialed the direct line of the county sheriff, a man named Chief Deputy Thomas, whom she had contributed heavily to during his recent election campaign. "Thomas," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and calculated panic. "This is Brenda Sterling, president of Whispering Cove. We have an active, high-priority security emergency at the waterfront property adjacent to Phase 2. That delinquent Logan Vance has hosted a massive, unauthorized gathering of what appears to be a violent armed outlaw motorcycle gang. There are dozens of them, Thomas. They are brawling on the lawn, burning toxic materials in an open pit, and they have multiple heavy, unregistered commercial vehicles blocking our emergency access roads. My security team is completely overwhelmed, and our residents are terrified. I need a full tactical response down here immediately to clear these criminals off our shoreline. They have weapons, they are drinking, and they are threatening to march into our development. If you don't act now, I will make sure the local media knows that the sheriff's office is soft on gang violence." She didn't stop there. Knowing that Logan was a junior lieutenant, she also called the administrative office of the naval base Kitsap, which was located just 15 miles down the canal. Her husband, a mid-level civilian logistics contractor for the Navy, had a contact in the base's administrative security division, a lieutenant commander named Henderson, who was known for his rigid bureaucratic adherence to regulations and his absolute lack of field experience. "Commander Henderson," Brenda lied, her voice dripping with patriotic concern, "I am calling to report a severe violation of military conduct by one of your junior officers, Lieutenant Logan Vance. He has currently occupied private shoreline property with a massive unauthorized crowd of civilian troublemakers, creating a severe public hazard and actively resisting local law enforcement. I is representing the United States Navy in a manner that is bringing profound disgrace to the uniform. I require a military police unit to be dispatched immediately to coordinate with the local sheriff and take custody of this officer before he starts a riot. I is completely out of control, and he is utilizing military equipment for personal, unauthorized gatherings." Brenda hung up the phone, a cold, triumphant smile returning to her face. She stood on her balcony, sipping her Chardonnay, watching the dark trees below. She could hear the faint sound of music and laughter coming from my yard. "Let's see how tough you are when the sirens start, Logan," she whispered. The night had fallen completely, a thick, cool blanket of darkness settling over Puget Sound. The only light on my property came from the warm, golden glow of the stone fire pit, and a few string lights hung from the cedar branches. My team was sitting in a loose circle, listening to a story being told by one of our senior chiefs when the silent peace of the forest was shattered by the sudden violent glare of red and blue lights. A convoy of vehicles was winding down my narrow gravel driveway. There were 4 county sheriff cruisers, their sirens silent, but their strobe lights flashing with a blinding, frantic intensity. Behind them came a heavy black military SUV with official government plates and the distinctive marking of the Naval Security Force, the military police. The vehicles skidded to a halt on the gravel area near my cabin, their headlights illuminating the entire backyard in a harsh white glare. Immediately the doors flew open, 8 county deputies dressed in tactical vests and carrying riot shields stepped out, their hands resting nervously on their holstered weapons. Behind them, 2 Navy military police officers in crisp black uniforms and white armbands stepped out of the SUV, accompanied by Lieutenant Commander Henderson, who looked incredibly severe, holding a leather folder of administrative citations. Brenda Sterling was leading the charge. She had walked down the public access path, accompanied by her husband Richard and her vice president Harold. She was practically vibrating with excitement, her face illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers. She looked like an inquisitor who had finally caught a group of heretics. She was holding her gold-plated clipboard like a weapon, her chin tilted up in an expression of supreme unchecked arrogance. "There they are," Brenda shrieked, pointing her gold-plated clipboard toward my friends. "Arrest them! Arrest the trespassers! Look at them, they are armed, they are drunk, and they are threatening our community. Commander Henderson, there is your delinquent lieutenant. Take him into custody. He has defied my warnings, and he is hosting a criminal gang on our borders. Look at those vehicles. They are a blight on our community." Commander Henderson stepped forward, his chest puffed out, his eyes scanning the yard with bureaucratic disdain. He adjusted his cover, pulling it down low over his brow, trying to look like a battle-hardened commander instead of a desk-bound administrative officer who spent his days managing parking permits and office supply requisitions. "Lieutenant Vance," Henderson barked, his voice filled with the practiced authority of a base administrator who had never seen a day of combat. "Step forward immediately. You are under administrative arrest for conduct unbecoming of an officer, creating a public hazard, and actively resisting civil authority. This gathering is officially declared an illegal assembly by order of the base commander." I didn't move. I didn't raise my hands. I simply stood there, my posture relaxed, looking at him with a calm, level gaze that made his bureaucratic confidence hesitate for a fraction of a second. "Commander Henderson," I said, my voice quiet, carrying easily over the idle of the police engines, "you are currently standing on private property deeded under a historic federal land patent. This is not military land, and you have zero jurisdiction here. Furthermore, my guests are currently on authorized secure operational leave. I suggest you check your administrative records before you make a mistake you cannot undo." I don't care about your historical land theories, Lieutenant," Henderson sneered, stepping closer, flanked by 2 military police officers. "Your conduct is a disgrace to the uniformed deputies. Clear this yard. Arrest anyone who resists. Chief Deputy Thomas the man." Brenda had called, stepped forward with 2 of his deputies, handcuffs already drawn. "All right, folks," Thomas called out, trying to project a tough, no-nonsense authority. "The party's over. Handcuffs behind your backs right now. We're clearing this property. No arguments, just move." For a brief, terrifying second, the yard was absolutely still. None of the 30 men stood up. None of them raised their hands. They simply looked at the deputies, and then they looked at each other. A slow, chilling smile began to spread across their faces. These were men who had faced down Al-Qaeda pirate boarding parties and hostile foreign intelligence units. The sight of a few county deputies and an administrative base commander trying to arrest them on a private beach was almost cute. It was like a group of chihuahuas barking at a pack of timber wolves. Then the man in the apron stood up. Admiral Richard Vance stepped out of the shadows of the grill, still holding his stainless steel tongs in one hand and a cold craft beer in the other. He walked slowly into the center of the yard, the harsh white headlights of the police cruisers illuminating his silver gray hair and his deeply lined, weathered face. He looked incredibly unimpressed. He wore a simple olive drab t-shirt and cargo shorts, but the sheer unyielding weight of his presence made the entire yard freeze. Commander Henderson blinked his eyes, adjusting to the light. He looked at the older man in the stained apron. He looked at the face. The bureaucratic sneer on Henderson's face froze. His skin went from a healthy pink to a sickly ash-gray color in the span of a single heartbeat. His breath caught in his throat, a soft, choking gasp escaping his lips. The leather folder in his hand suddenly felt like a block of lead. He knew that face. Every officer in the Pacific Fleet knew that face. It was the face of the man who had personally planned and executed some of the most sensitive special operations of the last 2 decades. "Hey, Admiral," Henderson whispered, his voice suddenly losing all of its volume, sounding like a frightened child. His hand immediately snapped up into a rigid, trembling salute. Chief Deputy Thomas paused, looking at Henderson in confusion. "Commander, what's wrong? Do you know this guy?" Admiral Vance took a slow, deliberate sip of his beer, his eyes locking onto Henderson with a cold, terrifyingly sharp focus that had silenced cabinets in Washington, D.C. "Lieutenant Commander Henderson," Admiral Vance said, his voice quiet, calm, and carrying the weight of a nuclear supercarrier. "I must have missed the memo where the naval-based Kitsap administrative staff was given the authority to declare a secure operational stand-down of my elite combat personnel in illegal assembly. Perhaps you can produce that order for me. I would love to read it. I would love to see which admiral authorized you to raid my family's estate and arrest my officers." Henderson's knees visibly trembled. He tried to maintain his salute, but his body was shaking so violently that he nearly dropped his leather folder. "Admiral Vance, sir," Henderson stammered, his teeth practically chattering. I was not informed. We received an urgent report of a violent civilian disturbance. A biker gang. We were told Lieutenant Logan Vance was creating a riot on the beach resisting local authorities. A biker gang, sheriff. Admiral Vance looked around the yard, his face deadpan. He gestured with his tongs toward the 30 men who were now standing up slowly, their rugged flannels shifting to reveal their military dog tags, their Navy SEALs in their unmistakable elite military bearing. "Henderson, these 30 ruffians you just ordered arrested are the primary operators of DevGru Red Squadron. They returned 48 hours ago from a highly classified national security mission in the Middle East. They are currently on a secure 48-hour mental and physical decompression stand-down authorized directly by my office. And you just brought civil authorities and military police to raid their secure location during an active operational leave." The silence that fell over the yard was deafening. The county deputies, realizing what was happening, slowly lowered their handcuffs. Deputy Miller, who had tried to warn Brenda earlier, actively stepped back, crossing his arms and looking at his Chief Thomas with a look that said, "I told you so." Chief Deputy Thomas's face had gone completely white. He looked at the 30 special operators standing in his headlights, men who looked like they could dismantle his entire sheriff's department in less than 90 seconds without breaking a sweat. He slowly tucked his handcuffs back into his belt. "Admiral," Thomas swallowed hard, his throat dry. We were misinformed by the complainant. We were told there was an active violent riot on the beach with suspected illegal firearms and threats to the civilian residents." Brenda Sterling was standing frozen on the gravel path, her jaw hanging open, her gold-plated clipboard trembling in her hand. Her husband Richard had already taken 3 steps back into the shadows of the trees, his face mask of arrogant superiority completely shattered. "Admiral," Brenda whispered, her voice thin, high-pitched, and filled with a sudden rising panic. But they don't have uniforms. They are dirty. They have muddy trucks. They are violating our aesthetic standards." Admiral Vance turned his head slowly, his cold gray eyes locking onto Brenda Sterling like a laser-guided missile. "Mrs. Sterling," the Admiral said, his voice dripping with a quiet, biting sarcasm that felt like an ice bath. "I apologize that my men's combat-tested clothing does not meet the color-coordinated standards of your estate. I will be sure to inform the Chief of Naval Operations that the next time our special operators return from risking their lives for this country, they must wear pastel polos and designer khakis to avoid offending your delicate sensibilities. The human mind has an interesting capacity to deny reality right up until the moment the handcuffs click." Brenda Sterling stood under the flashing lights of the police cruisers, her eyes darting from the silver-haired Admiral to the 30 silent, towering special operators, and finally to her husband, who was currently trying to blend in with the Douglas firs. This is a misunderstanding," Brenda stammered, her voice rising in a desperate, screeching pitch. "Thomas, you're the chief deputy. You have to do something. They are still violating the HOA rules. They have a $10,000 fine. They are blocking our access. They signed a compliance agreement." Marcus Vance, the Navy JAG captain, stepped forward from the woodpile. He held a laminated folder in his hand, a thin, sardonically pleasant smile on his face. "Ah, yes. The compliance agreement," Marcus said, his voice smooth, professional, and deadly. He pulled out a copy of the document Brenda had signed digitally on the HOA portal just an hour earlier. "I am glad you brought that up, Mrs. Sterling. I have the signed, executed copy right here, complete with your digital signature, your IP address, and your verified administrative credentials. You see, Brenda, in your haste to secure what you thought was an administrative victory, you didn't bother to read the legal terms of the waiver." Marcus turned to Lieutenant Commander Henderson, who was still standing at a rigid, trembling attention, his face the color of wet chalk. "Commander Henderson," Marcus said, his tone shifting to one of sharp military authority. As a Navy JAG officer, I am officially advising you that this HOA president has just executed a legally binding document in which the Whispering Cove Homeowners Association explicitly acknowledged that my client's guests are active duty Department of Defense personnel. In Clause 14B of this agreement, the association warranted that any administrative, civil, or law enforcement actions initiated by the HOA that disrupted or harassed these personnel during their authorized leave would constitute a material breach of federal military readiness standards. Marcus stepped closer to Brenda, his eyes locking onto hers with a cold legal satisfaction. By calling the local sheriff and the military police under fraudulent, highly exaggerated claims of a biker gang riot, solely because my client refused to pay your illegal administrative fines, you have actively and willfully disrupted a secure, federally authorized operational decompression stand-down of DevGru personnel. You have violated the Service Members Civil Relief Act. You have committed federal misdemeanor harassment of military personnel, and under Clause 14C of the agreement, you and the HOA board in your personal capacities have accepted 100% of the resulting civil, federal, and punitive damages. You signed away your corporate immunity, Brenda. You are personally on the hook for a federal civil rights violation. Your personal bank accounts, your luxury vehicles, and that glass mansion of yours are now active targets for federal asset seizure. Brenda's jaw worked soundlessly. She looked at the laminated document in Marcus's hand. She looked at her husband. "Richard," she screamed, "do something, call our lawyer." But Richard Sterling was currently being escorted out of the trees by Deputy Miller. Miller had his hand on Richard's arm, his face completely expressionless. He had seen the writing on the wall. He was a logistics contractor. He knew that crossing a 3-star admiral and a JAG captain was a career-ending move. Chief Deputy Thomas Admiral Vance said, his voice quiet but commanding, "Your department received a fraudulent emergency call reporting a violent armed riot. This woman used your officers, your cruisers, and your public resources as her personal private enforcement arm to harass a Navy lieutenant on his own private property. I believe your department has a very specific charge for that. I believe making a fraudulent emergency call that results in a tactical response is a felony in this state." And Chief Deputy Thomas did not hesitate. His political career was flashing before his eyes. He had just participated in a raid on a 3-star admiral and 30 of the military's most elite special operators because a wealthy HOA president didn't like some muddy trucks. If he didn't fix this immediately, he would be working security at a grocery store by Monday morning. Thomas turned to Deputy Miller. "Miller, cuff her." "What?" Brenda shrieked, her gold-plated clipboard finally slipping from her hand and clattering onto the gravel. "No, you can't arrest me. I am the president of the HOA. I contribute to your campaign." Richard Harold, "Stop them." Harold, the vice president, had already retreated to the very edge of the driveway, his hands raised in a gesture of total surrender, actively whispering to a deputy that he had voted against the fine. How was completely disassociating himself from Brenda's actions. Deputy Miller stepped forward, his face a mask of professional satisfaction. He grabbed Brenda's arm, spun her around, and clicked a pair of heavy cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists. "Brenda Sterling," Miller said, his voice flat and clear, "you are under arrest for filing a false police report, making a fraudulent emergency call, and harassment of federal personnel. You have the right to remain silent." "This is a conspiracy," Brenda screamed as she was led toward the back of Chief Deputy Thomas's lead cruiser. Her pristine white designer slacks were smeared with wet gravel, and her perfectly sprayed hair was falling into her eyes. "I will sue you all. I will have this cabin demolished." Richard called the governor. But Richard Sterling was currently being placed in the back of the second cruiser, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. I knew their luxury lifestyle was over. He knew his logistics company would lose every federal contract by Monday afternoon. Lieutenant Commander Henderson was still standing at attention, his eyes wide with terror. Admiral Vance walked over to him, stopping inches from his face. "Henderson," the Admiral said, his voice a low, vibrating growl, "you will return to Naval Base Kitsap immediately. You will write a full, detailed report of your administrative overreach tonight. And by Monday morning, you will have a transfer request on my desk. I hear the Logistical Support Office in Adak, Alaska is beautiful this time of year. They have excellent aesthetic standards up there. Mostly ice and rock. I'm sure you'll find it very peaceful. If that request is not on my desk by Monday morning, I will personally initiate a court-martial for administrative overreach and conduct unbecoming of an officer. Am I clear, Commander? Yes, Admiral. Henderson choked out, saluting with a hand that was shaking so hard it looked like a leaf in a storm. Thank you, Admiral. Henderson scrambled back into the military SUV, the doors slamming shut as the driver sped away down the driveway, the gravel spitting from the tires. They fled like kicked dogs. The county cruisers followed their strobe lights, turning off as they wound back up the hill, leaving the Vance estate in a quiet, peaceful darkness once more. The 30 special operators stood in the quiet yard, watching the taillights of the police cars disappear over the ridge. For a moment, there was a heavy, expectant silence. Then one of the senior chiefs walked over to the fire pit, picked up a massive, perfectly smoked rib, and took a huge, satisfying bite. "Well, Logan," he said, his mouth half full of delicious BBQ, "that was definitely the most entertaining 26th birthday party I've ever been to. But the ribs are getting cold, and I believe we have some beer left. I'd hate to let good hickory smoke go to waste." The yard erupted into a chorus of deep, roaring laughter. The music from the field radio was turned back up, the low, steady beat of classic rock filling the night air once more. Admiral Vance returned to the grill, a satisfied, quiet smile on his weathered face, as he flipped the remaining racks of meat. "Happy birthday, Logan," the Admiral said, raising his beer bottle toward me. "Happy birthday, Lieutenant," my team shouted, raising their bottles in a collective, powerful salute. The legal and financial fallout from that Friday night was swift, absolute, and completely devastating. By Monday morning, Marcus had filed a formal federal civil suit against the Whispering Cove HOA and Brenda Sterling in her personal capacity, citing the signed compliance agreement and the digital metadata that proved she had knowingly waived all corporate immunity. The Department of Defense's Regional Legal Command also filed a formal administrative complaint against the HOA for actively interfering with active duty military readiness and violating the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Confronted with a multi-million-dollar federal lawsuit, a mountain of undeniable digital evidence, and the prospect of a public trial involving 30 decorated Navy SEALs and a 3-star admiral, the HOA's insurance carrier immediately canceled their policy, citing willful illegal conduct by board officers. Without insurance and facing catastrophic punitive damages, the Whispering Cove HOA board collapsed. In an emergency town hall meeting, the terrified homeowners voted overwhelmingly to dissolve the HOA, entirely stripping Brenda of her crown forever. They realized that their pristine development was now a legal war zone. Brenda Sterling pleaded guilty to filing a false report and making fraudulent emergency calls to avoid federal prison time. She was sentenced to 200 hours of community service, ironically cleaning the public beaches and roadside ditches of the county, and was forced to pay $50,000 in restitution to the sheriff's department. To pay her legal fees and her personal portion of the damages, she was forced to sell her sterile glass and steel mansion at a massive loss. The mansion was bought at a foreclosure auction by a nonprofit foundation that turned it into a peaceful waterfront recovery center for combat veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress. Today, I still swim in the cold, clear waters of Puget Sound. My 3 orange safety boys bob gently on the gentle swells of the cove, marking the dangerous rocks of Dogleg Ledge. No one sends me letters, no one threatens me with fines, and whenever the new residents of Whispering Cove look down from the high bluff, they don't see an eyesore. They see a quiet sanctuary guarded by the silent, absolute strength of the pack.